All right, welcome Precalc. Let's do this. The game plan for today will be how do we divide polynomials. So I'm pretty sure before you got to this course, you learned how to add, subtract, and multiply polynomials, but dividing polynomials, maybe you have not learned it. So the game plan for today will be how to go through that lesson. So let's start off with simply, if I just said, hey, what is 16 times 18? You do these calculations and we get 288. And what are some true sentences we could create from this? Let's imagine if I said, hey, what is 288 divided by 16? Well, then that has to be 18. Or what is 288 divided by 18? That has to be 16. So just purely logical, we can conclude this, right? So let's imagine if I just said x equals 10. And if I wanted to create an expression that 16 is equal to, notice I could show 16 as x plus 6, because our x value is 10. And what do you think the next thing I'm going to show is? Let's have 18 be x plus 8. So let's say if we multiplied these two polynomials, right? Let's say if I have x plus 6 times x plus 8. Right? And remember, this value is 16 and this value is 18. And if I multiply it, what do we get? Right? Let's just go through the idea. We have x times x, that is x squared. The next one we have what? X times 8, that is 8x. And let's get it in another color over here. Let's have 6 times x is 6x. And the final part over here, we'll have 6 times 8 is 48, right? And what happens here? So then we combine the terms and we have x squared plus 14x plus 48. And here, notice that what do you think will happen if I plug in 10 into this expression over here? Like if I were to say take x squared plus 14x plus 48. If I were to plug in 10 in here for x, right, because that's what x is, what should it give us? Okay, why don't you pause the video and think about it, or try and do it yourself, right? Right. So let's say if I wanted to show you, right, let's substitute x for 10 in here, right? So we have 10 squared plus 14 times 10 plus 48. Notice that this becomes 100 plus 14 times 10. That is 140. So, oh yeah, so plus 48. This would be 240 plus 48. And notice, it equals 288, just like we had over here. So what are some sentences or ideas that we could have that are true? We said 16 times 18 is 288. So we showed that, right, that x plus 6 times x plus 8 is x squared plus 14x plus plus 48, right? When we multiply these two values, that's the polynomial expression we got. And notice that if this sentence is true, what other sentences or mathematical equations must also be true here? Using the same logic we showed over here, that if I take x squared plus 14x plus 48 and I divide it by x plus 6, it better give us x plus 8. And same idea, if I take x squared plus 14x plus 48 and I divide it by x plus 8, this better give us x plus 6. Okay? And the game plan is, how do we actually show that? So we know how to multiply polynomials. Let's go through the idea of dividing. So here, okay, this part I feel content with. Let's actually do the algebra, right? Because notice that if I said, hey, what is x squared plus 14x plus 48 divided by x plus 6, another way we could show it is through long division. So let me get this paper ready over here. And I think even before I do a question like this, let's take a look at one quick little example. If you want, you could have it as a side note, because I think it'll really help. Let's just review how do we do long division, right? Let's just review this idea. Let's go back to elementary school, back in the good days, right? So here, if I had, let's say, 288, and I divide it by 16, how would you do this, right? And let's think about the sentences or the thoughts you're saying in your head, because those rhythms and patterns we're going to correlate with dividing polynomials. So what is the first thing you do for long division, right? Like, how do you divide 16 into 288? What's the first question you ask yourself? You say, how many times does, notice, right? How many times does 16 go into 2? Well, you can't do that. How many times does 16 go into 28, right? So I know it seems a little extra, but I promise you it'll help. How many times does 16 go into 28, right? And how many 16s are inside 28? It's just 1, right? And then what do? You go 1 times 16 is 16, and you subtract, right? So you say 28 minus 16 is 12, and then what's the next thing you do? You bring down the 8, right? And then you say, hey, how many times does 16 go into 128, right? How many times does 16 go into 128? And what are you doing algebraically? You're doing 128 divided by 16, and if you do this calculation, you get 8, right? And then you put the 8 over here, and then what do? You say 8 times 16 is this. 8 times 16 is 128. You subtract, and you get a remainder of 0. Okay, so watch how we're going to show that rhythm and pattern for this idea of dividing polynomials. So here, the first move you're going to do is you're going to say how many times, and what I'd like you to do is when you write your notes, here we could show like one side as algebra and another side as steps. Writing out the steps will really, really help. So let's see, let me make sure camera angle is good. Okay, so the first rhythm you're going to say is how many times does x, right? And which x am I talking about? This x over here. How many times does x go into this x squared? Right? How many times does x go into x squared? It sounds a little weird when you say it, but imagine if I said, how many times does 5 go into 20, for example? Right? How many times does 5 go into 20? If you say 4, you're right. It goes in 4 times. But if you said it's because 5 times 4 is 20, try and look at it this way. How many times does 5 go into 20? What you're doing is 20 divided by 5, and that's 4. So the idea here is, notice that the 20 is on top, and 5 is on the bottom, or this is the numerator, this is the denominator. So then what are you going to have here? You're going to have, how many times does x go into x squared? We say x squared goes on top and x is on the bottom. And notice, how are you dividing these monomials? What are you doing with the exponent? You're doing x to the 2 minus 1, right? You're subtracting exponents when you divide. And this is just really x to the 1, which is just x. So that's one way of seeing it. Another way of seeing what x squared divided by x is notice that x squared is equal to x times x. And notice there's x on the bottom, right? And then how many x's are you left with? Just 1x. So this is another way of seeing it. But that's the rhythm of how you should see this. So how many times does x go into x squared, right? This x squared here. The algebra you're doing is x squared divided by x, and we showed that was equal to x. So what are you going to do with that x? You put it up here. And the same idea we had before, right? Like, you remember how many times does 16 go into 28? It went in one time. Then what did we do with that one? We did 1 times 16 is 16, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to do x times x is x squared, x times 6 is 6x. Okay? So now here you could say maybe step 2, multiply x times x plus 6, right? You're multiplying this x times this x plus 6. And what do you get? You get x squared plus 6x. Okay? Then what did we do afterwards? Right? Like in this problem, we did, how many times does 16 go into 28? It goes in 1 time. So 1 times 16 is 16. And then what did we do? We subtracted, right? We had this part of subtraction, and that's what you're going to do here. But one thing that you don't really see here is there are parentheses here. And that's what we're going to show over here. We're going to have parentheses over here, and we're going to subtract. Okay? So now here, one thing I like to say is parentheses, subtract. Okay? Because that's what you're doing. You're doing, like the first move is how many times does x go into x squared? It goes in x times x is x squared, x times 6 is 6x, parentheses, subtract. Okay, now let's do the algebra, right? First we're doing what? We're doing x squared minus x squared, right? We're doing x squared minus x squared, and that's equal to what? 0. So this cancels out. Then what do you have? 14x minus 6x is 8x. And then I put that 8x over here. Okay. If you had to take a guess, what do you think the next move would be before I continue? Same idea we had here. Once we did 28 minus 16, it was 12. We brought down the 8. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to bring down the 48. And I can show it like this. And you could say maybe step 4, bring down the rest of the terms. Okay. And now, how do we continue? Right? Like imagine, like just like we did before, we said, how many times does 16 go into 28? It went 1 time. 1 times 16 is 16. Parentheses subtract. Then you had 128 here. And what was the next question you asked yourself? How many times does 16 go into 128? And what you're doing is you're just going to say how many times does x, which is this x over here, go into 8x. And then what would be the algebra for that, right? You'd have 8x goes on top, x is on the bottom. What is 8x divided by x? It's just 8. And what do I do with that 8? Bring it up here, and I repeat. You're just like, once you bring down the terms, you're just kind of repeating this process over again. So then you say 8, how many times does x go into 8x? It goes in 8 times. 8 times x is 8x. 8 times 6 is 48. Parentheses, subtract. And then you do this algebra. What is 8x? This minus 8x is 0. So this cancels. What's 48 minus 48? That's 0. And that's what we have, right? Because notice that when we divided x squared plus 14x plus 48, if I divide it by x plus 6, we hope to get what? That x plus 8. And here it is. Okay? And how can you check to see some questions we need to explore further, and I'll do it in the next video because I think this was, even though we did one problem, it felt like a lot. So I'm gonna teach this lesson in multiple parts. But how can we, what are some questions we should explore? How can we check? Right? What does this 0 mean? This 0 over here. What does it mean? And we'll show that, or I'll talk about that in the next video. If you want, try this one on your own. And I could, try this one on your own and see what you get. If you want to see the answer, it will be x plus 8. Okay? See if you can get that by doing this polynomial division like this. Okay, I'll probably have this in, this was part 1, right? So I'm guessing because dividing polynomials may be a lot, I'll probably do it in like 3 parts. Okay, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you.